All right, for those of you who just saw this in action, we're going to do a quick tool review. And again, this is the DEWALT 60V, 9 amp, the battery that we're using, cordless chainsaw. As you can see here, we cut into a camphor tree. And again, we didn't want to cut the limbs up there. Well, one, because I don't have a ladder, but two, I wanted you to see what it was really like to cut through a thick part of a tree. We were trying to simulate sorry, this is just my OCD. Okay, all right. Just wanted to cut through a much thicker portion of the tree so that you could see the tool in action. So there are some obvious advantages of a cordless chainsaw. One being the weight, two being it's much quieter than a gas-powered chainsaw. Those are some of the obvious advantages. An advantage that is not so obvious is that, and I don't know if it's an advantage, but it's a break-even point for it. This thing is every bit as powerful as any 16-inch gas-powered chainsaw I've ever used. It's unbelievable. Now, one of the disadvantages of this is runtime. Even though it's not a big disadvantage if you have a few batteries, as you can see on the video where we did the actual cutting, showed it in action, this thing runs a long time before you have to switch the battery out. You know, the power, typically a gas-powered chainsaw is going to be much more powerful than a battery-powered chainsaw. I will say, this is not a paid review for DEWALT. I'm not getting any money. I just use this thing, so I want you guys to know, and we use a lot of different tools, but the 60-volt line of tools that DEWALT uses, they introduced it a few years ago, and it's pretty damn spectacular. And the reason is because it has allowed DEWALT to make and provide users tools that were normally reserved for either electric tools that had to be plugged in or for gas-powered tools, and that was because of the power required. If you have that much power, you can't really run it off a battery until a few years ago. So the flex volt tools that DEWALT has, they've got a chop saw, which you can actually plug 2 of the 60-volt batteries into the chop saw. Got a table saw. We've done a review on the demo saw / concrete saw. Now this, the chainsaw, again, typically those were tools that you could never, ever have as cordless tools because they just didn't have the power and they didn't have the runtime. The cons are that you can't really use this for any sort of heavy logging. For those of you who watched the actual review, as we were cutting into this, because the chain itself is only 16 inches, we would get to parts where, as I would turn it, because it has flex in it, it would bog down just a little bit, but not a whole lot. If you live in a residential neighborhood where people look down on the noise and they don't want to hear it, this thing is awesome. Same thing if you're in construction like we are. We go to a lot of job sites where, as you see here, we are removing a sidewalk. Go ahead, show that, Surya. We're removing a sidewalk and now we're running into a tree. Now, as you can see here, where we're taking this sidewalk out, this is actually spilling over onto where we're gonna have to put the new sidewalk. You can see here the sidewalk was actually under the tree because the tree grew on top of it. So what we're gonna have to do, stand over there, Surya, is on a lot of our sidewalks, we would have to cut a strip right here, which we absolutely could do with this chainsaw. In this case, we're just gonna remove the tree altogether because the city's requiring us to. But if we weren't and we just needed to slice that edge off, we would definitely use this chainsaw. So I would recommend this to anybody, again, who is looking for a good, powerful chainsaw with a good bit of runtime. If you'll see, I think we were probably close to 10 minutes of solid runtime on this thing before the battery crapped out. And when it crapped out on us, it did it immediately. So it never bogged down, but when it was ready to stop, it stopped, which is great. So we didn't spend 5 minutes cutting and then another 5 minutes trying to cut because the battery started to slow down on us. The only time this ever bogged down was, again, when I was bending it a little bit, and that's it. So any questions you've got, feel free to ask. There's some obvious safety features on this that are important. One, you should always take the battery out when you're doing anything, adjusting a blade, putting oil in or anything. Here you've got your safety handle. So you pull it back and that allows you to run the chainsaw. You've got your switch here, which is another safety switch. And when you're done, you push it forward and it won't engage. Now I don't have the battery in, but even if I did, it absolutely would engage. It's very handy, it's very compact, it's very light. If you've got other tools that are DEWALT tools, you can use the same battery for it, the Flex Volt batteries. And again, if you've got the heavier set of tools, same ones that we use, table saw, chop saw, demo saw, these batteries are all usable with all of those. So I really can't think of, honestly, any complaints that I have about this saw other than, and again, I need to check on it, the oil drains really fast in this. So we used it, we ran it, again, for about 10 minutes, a solid runtime over the course of about 15 minutes, and the reservoir is now empty, so I need to make sure that that's not an issue with the chainsaw itself. Perhaps that's just how fast it uses up oil. Other than that, that would be my only complaint, is that it uses a little bit too much oil. But if the trade-off is that you have to use that much oil to cut down trees, that's more than fair. And again, as you see here, it just ate through all these smaller pieces. Some of them are, 3/4 of an inch. It just cut right through them like it wasn't even cutting through anything. So good tool, I give it a thumbs up.